Of all the things he ever said or wrote, Frederick Buechner is probably best known for what he said about vocation. Given that he spent a great many years ministering and teaching at a private high school, it makes sense that he might be one of the leading voices on what it is to have a calling in the world. The truth is, of course, we often confuse vocation and career, but they're not the same. This is what Buechner said. Vocation is the place God calls you to. It's the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Buechner notes that vocation must fulfill both terms in that equation. So if you're the only one fulfilled by it, or if you're bored and depressed the whole time, then it's probably not a vocation. God's probably not calling you to that. But I always think that this really famous Buechner quote has to be held in tension with another one, the one where he says, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Do not be afraid." Because as it turns out, following our vocation doesn't eliminate sorrow from our lives. Following God's call does not mean that we will never grieve. It does not mean that there are no consequences to our action. In fact, following our vocation might actually amplify our anguish at times as we attend with greater depth to the needs of the world. Abiding God's call may pierce our own souls too. But those who say yes to God's promise receive with it this: you are not alone. We have heard over the last week all about Mary and her call, from Gabriel, from the shepherds, and today from Simeon and Anna. We heard how the terrifying and magnificent Gabriel came to Mary and called her weird things like favored one, and told her that the Lord is with you. And as we gathered around the nativity, we heard the message given to shepherds, a message that they poured out to Mary as they knelt at the manger cradle of her son. They told her that the angel said that this child was to bring about peace, real peace, and goodwill for all people. And they told her how a chorus of heavenly hosts sent them to her, how she, for whom there was no room, was not alone on that night. And today, we hear what Simeon tells her about how God is calling her to raise this child as one who stands against the powerful on behalf of the lowly. But Simeon's reminder bears another truth with it, that Mary's yes would also lead to sorrow and heartbreak because of her child. And I'm not really sure that that's news, because after all, to bear and raise a child in this world is basically to rip out your own heart and let it walk around in this terrible place. Like to take on risks and sadness and sometimes to get hurt. And after all, sorrow is simply the way of things on earth. I've been listening to this really remarkable little book about the poet Mary Oliver. And it speaks with all these people in her life and other poets who were inspired by her. And one of the poets is Bloomington's own Ross Gay. I love Ross Gay. And he says, every time I meet someone and get to know them a little bit, I find out some heartbreak. And most people have really profound heartbreak. Like, that's what we do. We walk around with these broken hearts, profoundly broken hearts. And we pretend not only like our own hearts aren't broken, but that the people we're encountering every second, all the time, we pretend like their hearts aren't broken. And I don't think any of us gets out of sorrow. A couple years ago, when my cousin was going through her divorce, we talked about wanting to make little buttons for everyone we know that just said, "Be gentle. I'm going through whatever. Be gentle. I'm going through sorrow. Be gentle. A sword will pierce your own soul too." Here is another thing that is not breaking news. We live in a changing world. Many of us have been called into vocations that look nothing like they did when we started. and which may not even be around when we finally rest from our labors. And even if they are, they're not going to look anything like they do today. Technology has changed us. Our culture's priorities have shifted. Old conflicts are working their way out in whole new ways. We all know folks who seem to be adapting really well to these changes and challenges, or at least their sunny, happy social media posts make it seem like they're adapting really well. We know folks who are clinging to the past, sure that the old way is the absolute best. And we know fatalists who will tell us that the world will end if we don't change absolutely everything. And futurists who see little value in the old ways of doing things and who leap ahead without question or critique. And we all, of course, know folks who, in their struggle and profound loss at all these changes, take it out on everyone else around them. Unable to transform their pain, they transmit it to everyone, like Richard Rohr would tell us. They blame their colleagues, their boss, their clients, or students. They're pretty sure that those sunny, happy people who seem to be adapting well are actually to blame for the whole thing. And of course, some days that's us. Most of us are some combination of all these folks. Some days rolling with the punches, some days petrified and perfectly stuck, some days adapting well, some days grieving for what was and what we thought we were going to do, sometimes angry for how the world is shifting away from what we love and the ways we love doing it. The fact of the matter is, when we said yes, we were not agreeing to the joy and happiness and easiness of doing what mattered profoundly to us. We said yes to the needs of the world, and therefore to a sword that might pierce our own soul too. But there is joy in this. Here's what else Ross Gay says in that Mary Oliver book. We do not get out of this thing without profound difficulty. I'm very interested in how joy is what kind of emanates from us when we care for each other through our sorrows. Like, joy is not what happens when we win the game-winning shot, but it's what happens when we are with each other in the midst of our sorrow, which is immense and ongoing and abiding. If we can tend to one another through this and with that, and be with one another through that and with that, and if there is joy, it's a kind of plenty, you know? And it's a kind of plenty that is really a disruptive plenty. And we see it. Like when people come together with one another, it's wild and beautiful. You know, it's Simeon that tells Mary all the great things Jesus will do and all about her soon-to-be pierced heart. But then there's Anna. Anna, whose name means grace and beautiful. Anna, daughter of the one whose name means face of God, of the tribe whose name means happy, who upon seeing the baby went and told everyone she could find of hope and God's abiding presence in the world. And this image of the young, exhausted, and quite frankly, terrified mother sharing the sweet warmth of her baby, the way these women come together in sorrow and hope, it is wild and beautiful, and it is joy. And maybe that's the moral here, the good news. When the sorrow and the just too muchness of just everything threatens to overwhelm you, beloved, that there are others alongside you wading into the depths of a world in need. We won't be without pierced hearts in this world, and we will not be without sorrow when we follow the call of God, but we will also not be alone. And there is joy that comes when we are with one another. Amen.